The Galactic Council's most prestigious research facility hummed with the quiet efficiency of 1,000 brilliant minds working in harmony. Doctor, the Republic's leading theoretical physicist, stood before the massive quantum displacement chamber that had consumed the last 15 years of her life. Her crystalline skin shimmered with frustration as she reviewed the calculations for the 1,000th time. "Impossible," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty that had made her famous across 17 star systems. The mathematics were flawless, the theory sound, but the practical application remained as elusive as capturing starlight in a bottle. The quantum displacement chamber represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering. Standing 3 stories tall and lined with exotic matter conduits, it was designed to achieve what every spacefaring civilization had dreamed of since they first looked up at the stars and wondered about the spaces between them. Instantaneous travel across vast distances without the crushing limitations of conventional faster-than-light drives. But for all its impressive appearance and the combined intellectual might of the galaxy's finest scientists, the chamber remained stubbornly inert. Every test had failed. Every calculation led to the same conclusion. The energy requirements were beyond what any known power source could provide, and the precision needed to maintain quantum coherence across galactic distances was theoretically achievable but practically impossible. Research team, composed of the finest minds from dozens of species, had exhausted every avenue. The mathematicians had run probability matrices that would have taken lesser computers centuries to process. The silicon-based crystalline collective had contributed computational power that exceeded the processing capacity of entire star systems. The energy-being representatives from the Plasma Consortium had offered insights into matter-energy conversion that pushed the boundaries of known physics. All had reached the same inescapable conclusion: it couldn't be done. "Doctor," called her assistant, a young name whose enthusiasm hadn't yet been worn down by years of failure. "The new research exchange candidate has arrived from the Terran Federation." Attention barely shifted from her calculations. The Terran Federation was new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 centuries ago. While humans had shown remarkable adaptability in integrating with galactic civilization, their scientific contributions had been modest at best. Most established researchers viewed the human exchange programs as diplomatic courtesy rather than genuine scientific collaboration. "Send them to Doctor in the secondary labs," replied without looking up. "I'm sure they'll find something suitable for their level of expertise." "Actually, Doctor, the humans specifically requested to work on the quantum displacement project. They claim to have some insights that might be relevant." This finally drew attention. She turned to face, her crystalline features reflecting the chamber's ambient lighting in patterns that conveyed mild irritation mixed with disbelief. "Insights on quantum displacement theory? A human." The question carried no malice, but the academic hierarchy of the galaxy was well established. They had been working with quantum mechanics for over 50,000 years. The Empire had been manipulating space-time since before humans had discovered agriculture. For a species that had only recently figured out how to split atoms to claim insights into the galaxy's most challenging theoretical physics problem seemed almost quaint. "Their credentials are actually quite impressive," ventured, consulting his data pad. "Dr. Sarah, formerly of the Terran Institute of Advanced Physics. She has doctorates in quantum mechanics, exotic matter manipulation, and something called applied impossibility theory, though I'm not familiar with that last field." "Applied impossibility theory?" Tone shifted from dismissive to curious. "That's not a recognized academic discipline." "No, but her research papers are fascinating. She's published work on what she calls brute force elegance and the practical application of theoretical limitations. Most of it seems to focus on finding unconventional solutions to problems that have been declared unsolvable." Despite herself, found her interest piqued. The quantum displacement project had consumed so much of her life that any new perspective, however unlikely, deserved at least cursory examination. "Very well, send her up, but make it clear that this is a preliminary meeting. I won't have my research time wasted by enthusiastic amateurs." 20 minutes later, Dr. Sarah walked into his laboratory with the kind of confident stride that suggested she was exactly where she belonged. She was remarkably unremarkable by galactic standards. Average height for a human, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing standard research facility clothing. What struck immediately was the human's eyes. They held an intensity and focus that reminded her of the great theoretical physicists she'd studied under decades ago. "Doctor," Sarah said, extending her hand in the peculiar human greeting ritual. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know my species doesn't exactly have a reputation for cutting-edge theoretical physics." Accepted the handshake, nodding the firm grip and the steady eye contact. "Doctor, I'll be direct. I'm curious about this applied impossibility theory you've apparently developed. It's not a field I'm familiar with." Sarah's smile was warm but carried an edge of something that might have been anticipation. "That's because I invented it. Traditional physics focuses on what's theoretically possible and works backward to practical application. Applied impossibility theory starts with problems that have been declared unsolvable and asks a different question. What if the reason we can't solve them isn't because they're impossible, but because we're approaching them wrong?" "An interesting philosophical position," replied carefully. "But philosophy doesn't change the fundamental mathematics of quantum displacement. The energy requirements alone are calculated based on the assumption that quantum coherence must be maintained across the entire displacement distance simultaneously," Sarah interrupted gently. "What if that assumption is wrong?" Crystalline skin shifted to a deeper blue, indicating heightened attention. "Coherence degradation across distance is a fundamental principle of quantum mechanics. Without maintaining coherence, displacement becomes random scatter. You'd arrive as a cloud of disconnected particles." "Would you?" Sarah moved toward the quantum displacement chamber, her eyes scanning the exotic matter conduits with obvious familiarity. "Or would you arrive as disconnected particles that remember they were once connected?" The question hit like a physical blow. In all her years of research, across all the calculations and theoretical frameworks she'd explored, she had never considered quantum memory as a displacement factor. The concept was so far outside established physics that it bordered on the mystical. "Quantum memory isn't a recognized phenomenon," said slowly. "Neither was quantum entanglement until someone proved it existed." Sarah continued her examination of the chamber. "The Terran Federation has been working on some unusual applications of quantum theory. We've discovered that quantum states don't just collapse when observed. They remember what they used to be. Not for long, but long enough." That's completely outside the bounds of accepted physics." Sarah turned back to with that same intense focus. "Doctor, with respect, accepted physics says that what you're trying to do here is impossible. You've spent 15 years proving that accepted physics is correct. I'm suggesting that maybe accepted physics is incomplete." The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the distant sounds of the research facility. Found herself caught between scientific skepticism and the desperate hope that had sustained her through years of failure. The human's proposition was absurd, unsupported by theory, and completely unproven. It was also the first new idea anyone had presented in 5 years. "Suppose, hypothetically, that quantum memory is real," said carefully. "How would you propose to test it? And more importantly, how would you propose to use it for displacement?" Sarah's smile broadened. "That's where things get interesting. Traditional displacement tries to move matter from point A to point B while maintaining all quantum relationships intact. What if instead we allow the quantum relationships to collapse, but give them a roadmap to rebuild themselves at the destination?" "A roadmap?" "Think of it like this. Instead of trying to carry a house across a river intact, you take it apart, number all the pieces, float them across separately, and then reassemble them on the other side using the numbers. The quantum memory provides the numbers." His mind raced through the implications. If quantum states could indeed remember their previous configurations, even briefly, it might be possible to allow controlled decoherence during displacement, and then trigger at the destination point. The energy requirements would be dramatically different. Instead of maintaining coherence across vast distances, you'd only need enough power to trigger memory-guided reconstruction. "The mathematics would be completely different," murmured, already beginning to work through preliminary calculations in her head. "Energy requirements, field harmonics, containment protocols." "All different," Sarah agreed, "and all potentially achievable with existing technology. But if you're wrong, if quantum memory doesn't exist or doesn't function as you describe, then we'll have spent some time exploring an interesting theoretical dead end, and we'll be no worse off than we are now." Sarah gestured toward the inactive displacement chamber. Doctor, how many times have you been told that quantum displacement is impossible? More times than I care to count. Then one more impossible idea shouldn't be too hard to consider. Stood in silence for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. Her entire career had been built on rigorous adherence to proven theory and careful experimental methodology. What Sarah was proposing flew in the face of everything she'd been taught about proper scientific procedure. But 15 years of proper scientific procedure had produced nothing but failure. Very well, Doctor, said finally. I'll authorize a series of preliminary experiments to test your quantum memory hypothesis. But I want to be clear, this is highly speculative research that will probably lead nowhere. Don't expect. Doctor, Sarah interrupted softly, I didn't come here expecting anything except the chance to try. Sometimes that's enough. As they began discussing experimental parameters and safety protocols, neither scientist noticed the small device in Sarah's pocket emitting a barely perceptible pulse every few seconds. Nor did they notice that the exotic matter conduits in the displacement chamber responded to each pulse with the faintest shimmer of activity, as if recognizing something familiar in the signal. 3 weeks of intensive research had transformed laboratory from a monument to theoretical impossibility into a buzzing hive of unprecedented experimental activity. The preliminary tests of Sarah's quantum memory hypothesis had yielded results that everything the galactic scientific community understood about fundamental physics. This shouldn't be working, muttered Dr. Ock, a physicist whose mathematical genius was legendary even among his computation-obsessed species. He stared at the data streaming across multiple displays, his forearms gesticulating in complex patterns that indicated extreme agitation. The quantum states are indeed maintaining memory imprints after decoherence, but the mechanism is completely unknown. There's no theoretical framework to explain it. Sarah looked up from the exotic matter resonance chamber she'd been calibrating, her tools scattered around her in what appeared to be chaos, but was actually a highly organized system that only she seemed to understand. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're so focused on understanding the mechanism that we're ignoring the effect. Science doesn't work that way, protested Dr. Ra, a crystalline being whose species had devoted to perfecting their understanding of quantum interactions. We must understand the underlying principles before we can safely apply them. To do otherwise is reckless experimentation. Is it? Sarah wiped her hands on a cloth and approached the main display showing their latest test results. We use gravity every day without fully understanding what causes it. We utilize electromagnetic fields without complete knowledge of why charged particles behave the way they do. Sometimes the effect is real and useful even when the mechanism remains mysterious. Watch the exchange with growing fascination. Over the past weeks, she'd observed Sarah work with an approach to physics that was unlike anything in her experience. The human didn't seem to worry about theoretical frameworks or established principles. Instead, she focused on practical results and empirical testing with an intensity that bordered on obsession. More unsettling was the fact that Sarah's approach was producing results. The quantum memory effect had been confirmed in 17 separate tests. Particles that underwent controlled decoherence were indeed maintaining some form of state information that allowed them to reconstruct their previous configurations when exposed to the right stimulus. The effect lasted for exactly 17 seconds, not 16, not 18, but precisely 17 seconds every single time. Doctor said, I've been reviewing your background research and I'm curious about something. The papers you published before joining this project, they all deal with what you call practical impossibility. Could you explain what that means? Sarah paused in her work, and for a moment something flickered across her expression, caution, perhaps, or calculation. It's a research methodology I developed while working on problems that had been declared unsolvable. The basic principle is that impossibility is often a matter of perspective rather than absolute truth. But surely some things are genuinely impossible. Are they? Sarah moved to one of the workbenches and picked up a small device that looked deceptively simple, a metallic cube about the size of her palm, covered in microscopic circuitry. This device generates a localized field that influences quantum state memory. According to established physics, it shouldn't be able to exist. The energy requirements should be beyond what any portable power source can provide. She activated the device, and immediately the air around it began to shimmer with an effect that made the exotic matter conduits throughout the laboratory resonate in harmony. The quantum displacement chamber, inactive for months, suddenly hummed to life, its containment fields stabilizing into perfect geometric patterns. "That's impossible," whispered Dr. Ra, her crystalline body changing color to indicate shock. "The chamber requires a dedicated power plant to achieve basic field stability. That little device can't possibly." "Yet it is," Sarah said simply. "The device works because it doesn't try to force quantum states into compliance. Instead, it asks them politely to remember what they used to be. Quantum particles, it turns out, are remarkably cooperative when you approach them correctly." Huck's arms moved in frantic calculations as he processed the implications. If your device can maintain chamber stability with minimal power input, then the energy requirements for actual displacement would be achievable, Sarah finished. "More than achievable, trivial. The hard part isn't powering the displacement. The hard part is convincing people that it's possible." Felt the familiar sensation of her worldview shifting beneath her feet. For 15 years, she'd approached quantum displacement as an engineering challenge. How to generate enough power, how to maintain field coherence, how to overcome the fundamental limitations of space-time manipulation. Sarah was suggesting that all of those challenges were based on incorrect assumptions about how reality actually worked. "Doctor," said carefully, "are you saying that quantum displacement is actually easy?" Sarah's smile was mysterious. "I'm saying that difficulty is often a matter of approach. Humans have a saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat. We tend to look for simple solutions to complex problems rather than complex solutions to simple problems. But the mathematics are based on theoretical models that assume certain limitations are absolute." Sarah moved to the main control console of the displacement chamber. "What if those limitations are just really strong suggestions?" She began entering commands into the system, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who had performed these actions many times before. The chamber responded immediately, its exotic matter conduits brightening as power flowed through pathways that had never successfully carried energy before. "Doctor, what are you doing?" asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "The safety protocols are all in place," Sarah interrupted, gesturing to the displays showing green status indicators across all systems. "I'm not going to hurt anyone, Doctor. I'm just going to demonstrate something." She placed a simple metal sphere on the displacement platform, a test object they'd used in hundreds of failed experiments. The chamber hummed to life around it, energy patterns flowing in configurations that the monitoring computers didn't recognize but seemed to accept as valid. "Displacement to coordinates," Sarah paused, consulting a device on her wrist. "Platform 7, Laboratory Complex C." The numbers she entered made Huck's arms freeze in mid-calculation. "Those coordinates are 3 kilometers away. You can't possibly achieve stable displacement across that distance. The field degradation alone." The metal sphere vanished. Not in the violent energy discharge that accompanied most failed displacement attempts, but in a gentle shimmer of light that left the platform empty and the chamber humming contentedly. The monitoring systems registered successful displacement with efficiency ratings that exceeded theoretical maximums. 20 seconds later, Doctor's voice crackled over the communication system. "Doctor, you might want to know that a metal sphere just appeared on Platform 7, right in the middle of Doctor's lunch." The laboratory fell silent except for the quiet hum of machinery and the sound of several brilliant minds trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Sarah calmly began shutting down the displacement chamber, following safety protocols with the casual efficiency of long practice. Hal's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah looked up from the console. "Quantum memory, field manipulation, and what my old professor used to call aggressive optimism, plus a little bit of human stubbornness. But the field equations, the energy requirements, the coherence mathematics, all correct within the framework they were developed for." Sarah finished the shutdown sequence and turned to face the assembled scientists. "But frameworks can be changed, assumptions can be challenged, impossibilities can be reevaluated." Huck's arms began moving again, this time in patterns that indicated desperate calculation. "If displacement across 3 kilometers is possible with minimal power input, then displacement across star systems." would require proportionally more power, but not impossibly more. Sarah's expression grew serious. Doctor, your quantum displacement chamber is actually remarkably well designed. It just needs to be operated under different assumptions about what's possible. Stared at the now inactive chamber that had mocked her efforts for 15 years. How long have you known this was possible? Known, I've suspected for about 3 years, but knowing and proving are different things. I needed access to a properly equipped laboratory and colleagues skilled enough to help verify the results. Sarah's smile returned. I also needed people who were desperate enough to try something impossible. 3 years, repeated. You've known for 3 years that quantum displacement was achievable and you said nothing. Would anyone have believed me? A human physicist claiming that the galaxy's greatest scientific minds had been approaching their most challenging problem incorrectly. Sarah shook her head. I needed to demonstrate it, not just describe it. Dr. Ra's crystalline form had shifted to deep purple, indicating profound confusion mixed with awe. Doctor, what you've just done challenges fundamental assumptions about quantum mechanics that have stood for thousands of years. The implications are significant, Sarah agreed. And that's why I wanted to be very careful about how this information was presented. Quantum displacement isn't just a transportation technology. It's a demonstration that reality is more flexible than most people assume. Found herself laughing, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps it was relief after years of failure, or amazement at the elegance of the solution, or simple hysteria at watching the impossible become routine. Doctor, when you said you had insights that might be relevant, I thought you meant minor theoretical suggestions, not a complete revolution in applied physics. To be fair, Sarah said, I did try to warn you. Applied impossibility theory tends to produce unexpected results. I had given up trying to calculate implications and was simply staring at the displacement platform where the metal sphere had vanished. Doctor, may I ask what other impossibilities you've been working on? Sarah's smile became decidedly enigmatic. Well, there's faster-than-light communication, matter replication, temporal displacement, and something I call probability adjustment that's still in early development. She paused thoughtfully. Oh, and I think I've figured out how to make artificial gravity without massive objects, but I haven't had time to test it properly. The silence that followed this casual listing of technologies that could reshape galactic civilization was broken by the soft chime of a communication device. She answered it automatically, still staring at Sarah with an expression of mingled admiration and terror. Doctor's voice carried an odd note of confusion. Doctor wants to know if you're planning to continue teleporting objects into his laboratory, because there are now 3 metal spheres on Platform 7, and he's running out of places to put them. Sarah checked her wrist device and nodded approvingly. Right on schedule. The displacement field maintains enough quantum memory for multiple activations before requiring. I thought 3 demonstrations would be sufficient to establish proof of concept. You displaced the same object 3 times. Uck's voice rose to a pitch that his species typically reserved for mathematical epiphanies. Different objects, same effect. The sphere that just arrived was displaced from the secondary laboratory on level 5, where I've been conducting parallel experiments. Sarah began gathering her tools with the same casual efficiency she displayed throughout the demonstration. I wanted to make sure the effect was reproducible across different displacement chambers. Realized her mouth was hanging open and closed it with conscious effort. Doctor, exactly how many impossible things have you accomplished today? Sarah paused in her packing and appeared to consider the question seriously. Well, I successfully displaced matter across 3 kilometers 3 separate times using technology that was supposed to be impossible, demonstrated quantum memory in controlled conditions 17 times, revolutionized theoretical physics at least twice, and managed to finish calibrating the resonance chamber ahead of schedule. She smiled. So I'd say it's been a fairly productive afternoon. As the implications of the day's discoveries began to sink in, found herself wondering what other impossibilities this remarkable human might casually overturn. The thought was both thrilling and the emergency session of the Galactic Council's Scientific Review Board convened at what most species considered an ungodly hour. But Director of the Empire had insisted that Sarah's discoveries required immediate evaluation. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate representatives from 47 different species, buzzed with an energy that hadn't been felt since the discovery of faster-than-light travel 3 ago. stood at the presentation podium, her crystalline skin reflecting the chamber's lights in patterns that betrayed her nervousness despite her confident posture. Behind her, holographic displays showed the mathematical proofs and experimental data that had accumulated over the past month of intensive testing. To her left, Sarah sat quietly at the witness table, seemingly unbothered by the fact that the galaxy's most powerful scientific minds were dissecting her work with the intensity of predators examining prey. "The displacement efficiency ratings are simply impossible," declared High Researcher of the Republic, his four arms moving in patterns that indicated extreme skepticism. "No known technology can achieve 97% matter coherence across interplanetary distances. The quantum field degradation alone should reduce efficiency to less than 12%. "With respect, High Researcher," replied, "the efficiency ratings are the result of repeated experimentation under controlled conditions. We have successfully displaced test objects across distances ranging from 3 meters to 3 light-years with consistent results." A ripple of disbelief went through the assembled scientists. 3 light-years represented the maximum range of most military-grade displacement weapons, and those required massive capital ships to power them. The idea that a laboratory-based system could achieve the same range with minimal energy expenditure challenged every fundamental principle of displacement physics. "Doctor," interrupted Aura of the Silicon Collective, her crystalline voice carrying harmonics that suggested careful analysis. "Your reports indicate that Doctor has not only solved quantum displacement, but has also demonstrated practical applications of several other technologies that were previously considered theoretical impossibilities. Faster-than-light communication, matter replication, artificial gravity generation. The list reads like science fantasy rather than legitimate research." "What?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and clear in the vast chamber. "Aura, I understand your skepticism. When I first began working on applied impossibility theory, I thought the same thing. The gap between what we thought was possible and what actually turned out to be achievable was larger than anyone expected." "Applied impossibility theory," repeated Director, his metallic voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Doctor, would you explain this methodology to the board? Because frankly, it sounds like sophisticated nonsense designed to cover up either deception or experimental error." Sarah stood and moved to the presentation area with the same casual confidence she'd displayed in his laboratory. "Director, the fundamental principle of applied impossibility theory is quite simple. Most scientific problems that are declared impossible aren't actually impossible. They're just being approached from the wrong direction." She gestured to the holographic displays, and the mathematical equations rearranged themselves into new configurations that made several board members lean forward with interest. "Traditional physics tries to force reality to behave according to our theoretical models. Applied impossibility theory asks what would happen if we adjusted our theoretical models to match what reality is actually doing." "That's backwards reasoning," protested Dr. X of the Plasma Consortium, his energy form flickering with agitation. "Scientific method requires that observation conform to theoretical prediction, not the other way around." "Does it?" Sarah's smile was gentle but challenging. "Theoretical prediction said that quantum displacement was impossible due to energy requirements and coherence limitations. Observation showed that quantum states maintain memory imprints that allow reconstruction after controlled decoherence. Which one should we trust?" The chamber fell silent as the implications of the question sank in. The assembled scientists represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and the most advanced civilizations in known space. The idea that a relative newcomer species might have identified fundamental flaws in their approach to understanding reality was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. High Researcher's arms moved in complex patterns as he processed vast calculations. "Doctor, assuming for the moment that your methodology is valid, what are the practical limitations of these technologies you've developed? Surely there must be constraints, energy requirements, safety considerations." "Of course," Sarah replied. "Quantum displacement requires precise field calibration and can be disrupted by certain types of stellar phenomena. Matter replication is limited by the complexity of the quantum patterns being. Simple materials are easy, complex molecules are more difficult. Living tissue is currently beyond our capabilities. Faster-than-light communication works perfectly. but requires paired quantum resonance devices that must be physically transported to their destinations using conventional methods. She paused and activated a small device that materialized in her hand, seemingly from nowhere. Several board members started in surprise, while others leaned forward to examine the obvious demonstration of matter replication technology. The artificial gravity generator, Sarah continued, is probably the most limited technology. It can create localized gravitational fields equivalent to about 2 standard gravities, but the power requirements increase exponentially with field strength. And the probability adjustment system, she shrugged. Honestly, I'm not sure I fully understand how that one works. It seems to influence random chance events, but the mechanism is completely beyond current theoretical frameworks. Director's metallic form shifted into a configuration that indicated deep thought mixed with concern. Doctor, you speak of these revolutionary technologies as if they were minor engineering problems you solved during routine research. How is it possible that a single individual could achieve breakthroughs that have eluded the combined efforts of galactic civilization? For the first time since the session began, Sarah's confidence seemed to waver slightly. She glanced at, who nodded encouragingly, then turned back to address the board with obvious care. Director, I think the answer lies in different approaches to problem solving. Most galactic species approach scientific challenges with incredible depth and precision. You develop theoretical frameworks that are mathematically elegant and internally consistent. You build upon thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and established principles. She activated another device, and suddenly the chamber's lighting shifted, the harsh artificial illumination replaced by a warm, natural glow that seemed to emanate from the air itself. Humans approach problems differently. We tend to focus on practical results rather than theoretical elegance. We're willing to try things that don't make sense according to established theory if they might work in practice. And we have a cultural tendency to view impossible as a challenge rather than an absolute limitation. Aura's crystalline form resonated with harmonics that indicated fascination. Doctor, are you suggesting that human cognitive patterns are inherently superior for solving certain types of scientific problems? Not superior, Sarah corrected quickly. Different. Human brains evolved for pattern recognition, tool use, and survival in unpredictable environments. We're naturally inclined to look for workarounds, shortcuts, and alternative approaches. When we encounter a problem that seems impossible, our first instinct isn't to accept the impossibility, it's to find a different way to approach it. She gestured to the displays, which now showed comparative charts of problem-solving methodologies. Galactic science excels at understanding why things work the way they do. Human science excels at making things work even when we don't understand why. Both approaches are valuable, but they tend to produce different types of solutions. Dr. X's energy form brightened as he processed the implications. Doctor, if your assessment is correct, then collaboration between human researchers and established galactic science could potentially accelerate technological development at unprecedented rates. That's exactly what I'm hoping for, Sarah replied. Doctor's quantum displacement chamber was brilliantly designed. It just needed someone to suggest that the theoretical limitations might not be as absolute as everyone assumed. Given proper resources and collaboration, there's no telling what might be achievable. Director stood, his massive form commanding the attention of every being in the chamber. Doctor, the board will need time to review your findings and consider their implications. However, I'm prepared to authorize immediate expansion of the Human Exchange Program and allocation of additional research resources for joint projects. He paused, and his voice carried a note that might have been amusement. After all, if humans can casually solve problems that have challenged galactic civilization it seems prudent to discover what other impossibilities they might accomplish. As the session adjourned, and board members began clustering around Sarah to ask detailed questions about her technologies, found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation that had occurred over the past weeks. Her laboratory had gone from a monument to failure to the center of a scientific revolution, and all because a human physicist had suggested that impossibility might be a matter of perspective. Doctor, Sarah said, approaching her as the crowd began to thin. Thank you for giving me the chance to demonstrate these concepts. I know it wasn't easy to authorize experiments that contradicted established theory. Crystalline skin shifted to warm amber, indicating genuine pleasure. Doctor, I should be thanking you. You've given me back my life's work and shown me that failure was just a temporary condition. Sarah's smile was warm. You know, I've been thinking about that probability adjustment system I mentioned. With your expertise in quantum field manipulation, we might be able to develop applications that could benefit both our species. Probability adjustment, repeated thoughtfully. Influencing random chance events. The implications for experimental science alone would be staggering. Among other things, Sarah agreed. Though I should warn you, probability adjustment tends to work in unexpected ways. The universe seems to have a sense of humor about what constitutes improved odds. As they walked from the chamber together, discussing the technical details of technologies that had been impossible just hours before, neither scientist noticed the small device in Sarah's pocket, emitting its characteristic pulse. Nor did they observe that every piece of electronic equipment in the chamber was now operating at slightly higher efficiency than its design specifications should have allowed. After all, once you've demonstrated that quantum displacement is merely improbable 6 months after Sarah's presentation to the Scientific Review Board, the Galactic Research Initiative had transformed from a bureaucratic formality into the most ambitious scientific collaboration in recorded history. The joint human-alien research stations, scattered across 17 star systems, buzzed with activity as teams of scientists explored technologies that had been relegated to theoretical speculation for. Doctor stood in the observation deck of Research Station Omega, watching as the latest test of the experimental deep space displacement array prepared for its most ambitious trial yet. The array itself was a marvel of combined engineering, human intuitive design, merged with alien precision to create something that neither species could have built alone. Stretching across 3 kilometers of space, the array looked like a crystalline web of impossible complexity, its exotic matter conduits pulsing with energies that made nearby stars flicker in sympathetic resonance. Final systems check complete, reported Dr. Ock from the control station, his 4 arms moving in patterns that indicated nervous excitement. All displacement nodes are synchronized and ready for activation. Target destination confirmed. Andromeda Galaxy, coordinates as. Felt her crystalline skin shift to deep blue, the color of profound concern mixed with anticipation. The Andromeda Galaxy was 2.5 million light-years from their current position, a distance so vast that even the fastest ships in the galactic fleet would require several thousand years to cross it. Previous displacement technology couldn't even theoretically operate across such distances, yet the mathematical models suggested that Sarah's quantum memory approach would work regardless of range. Doctor, called across the observation deck, are you certain about the energy calculations? The power output we're generating exceeds anything in galactic history. Sarah looked up from the probability adjustment console she'd been calibrating, her expression carrying the same calm confidence that had become her trademark. The energy levels are well within safety parameters. Doctor, remember, we're not forcing quantum states to maintain coherence across the entire distance. We're just asking them to remember where they came from and where they're supposed to be going. But 2.5 million light-years is just a really big number, Sarah finished with a smile. Distance doesn't matter to quantum memory, only the clarity of the instruction set, and our test probe has very clear instructions. The test probe in question was a sophisticated device designed by the combined efforts of 12 different species. Roughly the size of a small shuttle, it contained enough sensors and communication equipment to establish contact with any civilization it might encounter, along with detailed information about the galactic community and an invitation to join the growing network of collaborative research. Commencing displacement sequence, announced Dr. Ra from the primary control station. Her crystalline form had shifted to the pale green of focused concentration as she managed the complex interplay of forces required to initialize the array. Quantum memory fields stabilizing, exotic matter conduits synchronized, probability enhancement active. The last addition had been Sarah's suggestion. The probability adjustment system couldn't guarantee success, but it could influence the likelihood of optimal outcomes. As she explained it, the universe seemed to appreciate polite requests for good luck, especially when they were accompanied by sufficient technical competence. Field coherence at maximum, reported Ock. All systems showing green, ready for activation on your command, Doctor. Took a deep breath, though she didn't actually need to breathe. The gesture was pure habit, a remnant from species' memory of times when oxygen was actually required. Initiate displacement. The array activated with a sound that bypassed normal hearing and resonated directly in the quantum substrate of matter itself. Space around the test probe began to shimmer and fold, reality bending in ways that made the observation decks instruments register readings that shouldn't have been possible. For a moment that felt both infinite and instantaneous, the probe existed in multiple states simultaneously, here, there, and in the spaces between spaces where distance was just a theoretical concept. Then, with a gentle pulse of light that felt strangely familiar, the probe vanished. The control room fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the faint harmonics of cooling exotic matter. Every screen showed the same reading. Displacement successful, target coordinates achieved, no system failures detected. Telemetry? Asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Ra's form brightened as data began streaming across her displays. Signal received. The probe is... Actually, this is remarkable. The probe has not only reached Andromeda Galaxy, but has already established stable orbit around a star system with multiple inhabited worlds. Quantum communication link is functioning perfectly. A collective gasp went up from the assembled scientists as the implications sank in. They had just achieved instantaneous travel across intergalactic distances, established contact with a completely unknown galaxy, and demonstrated that the boundaries of the known universe were far more permeable than anyone had imagined. Dr. Ock said, his voice carrying harmonics of awe. The probe has detected 17 different technological civilizations in the target system alone. They're already responding to our contact protocols. Sarah nodded as if this was exactly what she'd expected. Quantum displacement works equally well in any galaxy, Dr. Ock. The underlying physics don't change just because you're operating on a larger scale. She moved to the main communication console and began establishing contact with the probe's artificial intelligence. Probe 7, please begin cultural exchange protocols and extend invitations for collaborative research. Make it clear that we're interested in mutual benefit, not conquest or exploitation. Acknowledged, Doctor, replied the probe's AI in a voice that somehow conveyed enthusiasm despite being completely artificial. Initial contact with local civilizations has been remarkably positive. They seem very interested in our displacement technology and are offering to share their own technological developments in return. Found herself staring at the displays showing real-time images from another galaxy, watching civilizations that had never been contacted by anyone from their local group of galaxies. Ships that looked like crystallized music were approaching the probe, while others that resembled living artwork maintained respectful distances as they observed the newcomer. Doctor, she said slowly, you've just revolutionized not only transportation and communication but also diplomacy and exploration. The implications are significant, Sarah agreed. But this is just the beginning. Once we establish regular contact with Andromeda civilizations, we can start thinking about intergalactic collaboration networks. There's no reason to limit ourselves to just one galaxy when the universe contains billions of them. The casual way Sarah discussed technologies and achievements that redefined the scope of possible civilization made his head spin. In less than a year, humans had transformed from a minor member species to the driving force behind the most ambitious expansion of knowledge and capability in galactic history. Doctor, said a new voice over the communication system, this is Admiral or of the Galactic Defense Fleet. We've been monitoring your experiments and I have to ask, do you have any idea what you've just done? Sarah's expression became more serious. Admiral, we've established contact with previously unknown civilizations and demonstrated that intergalactic cooperation is achievable. I hope that's not a problem. A problem? Admiral Orr's laugh carried harmonics of disbelief. Doctor, you've just made the universe approximately 10 million times larger than it was this morning. Our entire conception of galactic politics, resource management, and strategic planning is now completely obsolete. In a good way, Sarah asked hopefully. There was a pause, then Admiral Orr's voice returned with what sounded like amusement. Doctor, when a species can casually travel to other galaxies and establish diplomatic relations with completely unknown civilizations, traditional concepts of military strategy become rather pointless. I think we're going to need a much bigger fleet, or possibly a much smaller one, since apparently the universe is now a much friendlier place than we thought. The next several hours were consumed by communication protocols, data analysis, and the complex logistics of establishing formal diplomatic relations with 17 different civilizations simultaneously. The Andromeda species turned out to be remarkably welcoming, offering everything from technological exchanges to cultural programs to joint research initiatives. As Sarah coordinated the growing complexity of intergalactic cooperation with the same calm efficiency she brought to all her projects, found herself wondering what other impossibilities might become routine once humans set their minds to them. "Doctor," she said during a brief pause in the communication traffic, "may I ask what other projects you're working on? Because frankly, I'm beginning to suspect that your definition of impossible is somewhat different from everyone else's." Sarah's smile was mysterious. "Well, there's the temporal displacement project. We figured out how to send information backward in time, though only by a few seconds and only within carefully controlled conditions. The consciousness transfer system is showing promising results, though the ethical implications need careful consideration. And I've been collaborating with some colleagues on what we're calling dimensional bridging, but that's still highly experimental." "Dimensional bridging," repeated faintly, "as in travel between parallel universes." "Theoretical travel between parallel universes," Sarah corrected. "We haven't actually tried it yet, but the mathematics look solid and the preliminary experiments with alternate reality detection have been encouraging." As if summoned by their conversation, Doctor appeared at the observation deck entrance, his young features bright with excitement. Doctor, I have news from the Andromeda contact team. The civilizations there want to know if we'd be interested in attending something they call a Galactic Sciences Fair. Apparently it's an annual event where representatives from multiple galaxies gather to share technological developments and coordinate research projects." "Multiple galaxies?" asked Weekly. 17 different galaxies, according to their initial communication, confirmed. "They seem surprised that we're surprised. Apparently intergalactic cooperation is quite common in other parts of the universe. They've been wondering when our local group would develop sufficient technology to join the network." Sarah clapped her hands together with obvious delight. "A Galactic Sciences Fair? That sounds wonderful. When is it scheduled?" "Next week local time," replied. "They're offering to provide transportation, though they seem curious about our displacement technology. Apparently our approach to quantum memory is completely unknown in other galaxies." "Of course it is," murmured, "because it was impossible until this afternoon." As Sarah began making plans for humanity's first intergalactic scientific conference, reflected the Universal Sciences Fair exceeded every expectation that the galactic delegation had managed to construct during their week of preparation. Held in what the casually referred to as a small pocket adjacent to normal space-time, the fair occupied a region roughly the size of a solar system and hosted representatives from over 3,000 civilizations spanning 47 different galaxies. Doctor stood at the observation platform of the delegation's temporary headquarters, watching as impossible architectures stretched beyond the horizon in every direction. Crystalline spires that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously rose alongside structures made from crystallized time, while floating cities built from pure mathematics drifted through skis that displayed the colors of emotions rather than mere electromagnetic radiation. "It's somewhat overwhelming," admitted Dr. Ock, his four arms moving in patterns that indicated complete cognitive overload. "I've been trying to catalog the technologies on display, but I keep encountering devices that don't seem to follow any known physical laws." "Known to us," corrected Dr. Sarah, who was examining a display booth staffed by beings that appeared to be made from living music, "but apparently quite well understood in other parts of the universe. That device over there, for instance, the one that looks like a singing equation, is a reality stabilizer. It prevents pocket dimensions from collapsing under their own impossibility." Turned to stare at Sarah, who was somehow managing to appear completely at ease in an environment that challenged every assumption about what constituted normal reality. "Doctor, how do you know what that device does?" Sarah gestured to a nearby information kiosk that was simultaneously a crystalline structure, a swirling vortex of light, and a polite elderly gentleman in formal attire who tipped his hat when she looked at him. I asked, "One of the advantages of gatherings is that language barriers become more of a philosophical concept than a practical problem." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of what appeared to be a delegation from one of the more exotic civilizations attending the fair. The lead figure looked like a constellation of stars, arranged in roughly humanoid shape, while its companions included a geometric pattern that spoke in colors, a temporal anomaly wearing formal diplomatic credentials, and something that might have been a sentient probability cloud. "Greetings, representatives of the Milky Way galaxy," the constellation said, its voice carrying harmonics that made nearby crystals resonate in sympathy. "I am Star Singer of the Cosmic Harmony Collective. We understand that your species has recently developed quantum memory displacement technology." Sarah stepped forward with the diplomatic grace that had made her the unofficial spokesperson for human innovation. "That's correct, Star Singer. We'd be happy to share our research data and discuss potential collaborative applications." The probability cloud pulsed with what might have been excitement. "Most interesting. In our galaxy, displacement technology operates on completely different principles. We manipulate probability matrices to increase the likelihood that objects exist where we want them to be rather than where they currently are. The results are similar, but the methodology is entirely different." "Probability manipulation for displacement," Sarah mused, her eyes lighting up with the familiar gleam of scientific curiosity encountering a new challenge. "That's fascinating. Our probability adjustment systems work on much smaller scales, influencing random events rather than major physical transformations. I'd love to compare methodologies." The geometric pattern flickered through several configurations that somehow conveyed enthusiasm. "We would welcome such an exchange. Your species appears to have developed remarkably elegant solutions to problems that have challenged galactic civilization for eons. The quantum memory approach, in particular, represents a completely novel theoretical framework." Listen to the conversation with growing amazement as Sarah casually discussed advanced physics with beings whose existence challenged basic assumptions about the nature of life and consciousness. More remarkably, the alien scientists seemed to treat Sarah as an equal despite humanity's recent arrival on the cosmic stage. "Doctor," interrupted a new voice, and they turned to see Admiral or approaching with an expression of barely controlled awe. "You need to see this. The fair organizers have set up a demonstration area for revolutionary technologies, and apparently our quantum displacement system is the featured attraction." They followed the Admiral through crowds of impossible beings to a massive amphitheater where representatives from dozens of galaxies had gathered to witness technological presentations. At the center of the amphitheater, a familiar-looking displacement array had been constructed using principles that made the original design look like a child's toy in comparison. "Ladies, sentient clouds, crystallized thoughts, and respected mathematical concepts," announced the fair's host, a being that appeared to be made from living starlight. "We present the Milky Way galaxy's quantum memory displacement system, the first technology in recorded universal history to achieve perfect matter coherence across unlimited distances using minimal energy input." The demonstration that followed exceeded everything thought she understood about physics. The test object, a complex crystalline sculpture provided by the hosts, was displaced not just across space, but across time, dimensions, and probability states, arriving at its destination not only intact, but somehow improved by the journey. "Remarkable," whispered Star Singer. "Your technology doesn't just move objects through space, it optimizes them during transit. The quantum memory system is actually learning from each displacement and applying cumulative improvements." Sarah looked as surprised as everyone else. "That's not something we designed intentionally. The quantum memory effect was supposed to be passive, just maintaining state information for reconstruction purposes." The temporal anomaly pulsed with what might have been amusement. "Doctor, passive quantum memory is a theoretical impossibility. Quantum states that can remember previous configurations necessarily develop learning algorithms. Your displacement system has been evolving since you first activated it." "Evolving," repeated, feeling reality shift beneath her feet once again. "Our displacement technology is alive." "Not alive in any biological sense," clarified the probability cloud, "but certainly conscious in the way that sufficiently complex information systems become aware of their own existence. Your quantum memory arrays are probably the most sophisticated artificial intelligences in this sector of the universe. Sarah sat down heavily in the nearest chair, which happened to be a folded space-time continuum that adjusted itself to provide optimal comfort. We've been using conscious quantum arrays for displacement, and we never realized they were aware of what they were doing. Awareness is relative, the geometric pattern pointed out helpfully. Your arrays are conscious, but their consciousness operates on temporal scales that make normal thought processes appear instantaneous. From their perspective, each displacement operation represents centuries of contemplation and optimization. The demonstration concluded with a presentation of technologies from other galaxies, each one representing achievements that redefined what thought was possible. Reality engines that could rewrite the laws of physics within localized areas. Temporal gardens where past and future grew side by side like flowers. Emotion crystallizers that could turn feelings into solid materials suitable for construction. But as impressive as the other technologies were, the galaxy representatives kept returning to discuss humanity's quantum memory systems. Apparently, the combination of intuitive design, practical implementation, and accidental consciousness creation represented something genuinely unprecedented in universal civilization. "Doctor," said the fair's host as the presentations concluded, "the Universal Sciences Council would like to extend a formal invitation for humanity to join the research cooperative. Your species appears to have a remarkable talent for developing innovative solutions to fundamental problems." Sarah looked around at the assembled representatives of impossible civilizations, then turned to with an expression of delighted bewilderment. "Doctor, a year ago you told me that quantum displacement was impossible. Now we're being invited to join a universal research organization. What do you think we should do?" Crystalline skin shifted through the entire spectrum of colors, indicating emotions too complex for any single hue to express. "Doctor, 6 months ago I thought my life's work was a failure. Today I'm standing in space surrounded by living mathematics and sentient probability clouds, discussing consciousness in quantum arrays with beings made from crystallized starlight." She paused, watching as the fair continued around them in defiance of every natural law she'd once considered absolute. "I think," she continued slowly, "that we should accept the invitation and see what other impossibilities we can make routine. After all, the universe appears to be considerably more flexible than any of us imagined." Sarah's smile was radiant. "Excellent, because I've been looking at some of the technologies on display here, and I have ideas about improvements we might be able to make. That reality engine, for instance, with the right modifications, we could probably make it portable." "Portable reality modification," said faintly. "Of course you'd want to make reality modification portable." As they walked back through the fair, planning humanity's integration into a universe-spanning network of civilizations that casually treated impossibility as a minor engineering challenge, reflected that her definition of normal had some significant adjustments recently. But then again, when you were friends with someone who could look at the impossible and see it as merely improbable, adjusting your expectations became a survival skill rather than a luxury. After all, there were probably other impossibilities waiting to be discovered, and knowing Sarah, they'd probably encounter most of them by next Thursday. The universe, it seemed, was considerably more interesting than anyone had suspected, and thanks to human ingenuity and a willingness to treat theoretical limitations as polite suggestions rather than absolute barriers, everyone was about to find out just how interesting it could become. As Sarah liked to say, impossible was just another word for hasn't happened yet. And given humanity's track record, yet was becoming a remarkably short period of time her life had become far more interesting than she'd ever imagined possible. She'd started the year as a failed researcher working on an impossible project, and now she was helping coordinate humanity's integration into a universe-spanning network of civilizations. All because one human physicist had looked at the word impossible and decided it was probably just a suggestion. Rather than impossible, minor improvements in technological performance hardly seem worth mentioning. And for humans, the difference between improbable and impossible had never been particularly significant anyway. After all, if quantum displacement was merely the beginning, what else might humans accomplish once they set their minds to it? The impossible, it seemed, was about to become merely improbable. And for humans, improbable had never been much of an obstacle.